The crystal wine glass shattered against my kitchen floor, red wine spreading like blood across the white marble tiles. My daughter-in-law Rebecca stood frozen in the doorway, her face pale as the expensive pearls around her neck. But it was not the broken glass that made my heart pound against my ribs. It was the small empty vial I had just found hidden beneath her purse, the same vial I had watched her use to doctor my evening wine just minutes before. At 73 years old, I had survived corporate boardroom battles, hostile takeovers, and the death of my beloved husband. I built a real estate empire from nothing after Thomas died 12 years ago, turning grief into gold through sheer determination. But nothing had prepared me for discovering that my own family wanted me dead. The evening had started peacefully enough. Rebecca had arrived at my Beacon Hill mansion around 7, carrying a bottle of my favorite Bordeaux and wearing the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. She claimed she wanted to celebrate my recent decision to step back from active business management, though I suspected her real interest lay in the $47 million that decision would free up. Thomas always told me I was too suspicious, too careful about people and their motives. 25 years of marriage to that gentle soul had almost convinced me to trust more freely. Almost. But 12 years of running Wilson Properties alone had sharpened those old instincts until they cut like surgical steel. Tonight those instincts had saved my life. I had excused myself to use the powder room, leaving Rebecca alone with the wine glasses in my study. When I returned, she was standing by the window, looking out at the harbor lights with studied casualness. Nothing seemed different, except for the faint medicinal smell that had not been there before. A smell I recognized from my late friend Margaret, who had fought a losing battle with digitalis poisoning after her grandson got too eager about his inheritance. Instead of drinking the wine Rebecca offered me, I had set it aside and engaged her in small talk while I pretended to sip from an empty glass. Within 30 minutes, Rebecca was checking her watch repeatedly and asking how I felt. When I claimed to feel perfectly fine, the disappointment in her eyes was unmistakable. That was when I decided to search her purse. Rebecca finally found her voice. "Eleanor, what are you doing going through my things?" Her tone carried just the right note of injured innocence, but her hands were shaking. I held up the small glass vial, studying the few remaining drops of clear liquid in the bottom. "This is an interesting little bottle, Rebecca. What was in it?" She stepped toward me, her heels clicking on the marble. "I have no idea what that is. It must have fallen out of someone else's bag at the charity luncheon today. You know how those events are. Everyone sets their purses down together." The charity luncheon story was plausible enough. Rebecca chaired several committees and attended dozens of fundraising events each month. It was one of the things my son David found so attractive about her when they married 5 years ago. A wife who could network and charm potential clients while looking beautiful on his arm. But Rebecca had made one crucial error. The vial was not just empty. It was clean, wiped spotless except for those few drops at the bottom. Someone had taken great care to remove fingerprints. I moved to my desk and opened the bottom drawer, pulling out the small digital recorder I used for dictating business correspondence. "Rebecca, I'm going to ask you one more time. What was in this vial?" "Eleanor, you are scaring me." Her voice climbed higher. "Why do you have a recorder? What is this about?" I pressed the record button. It is Tuesday evening, November 15th. I am Eleanor Wilson, and I am recording this conversation in my home study with my daughter-in-law, Rebecca Chen Wilson. "Rebecca, please tell me what substance you put in my wine glass approximately 45 minutes ago." The color drained from her face completely. "I did not put anything in your wine. This is insane. You are clearly having some kind of episode." "An episode? How convenient." At 73, any accusation I made could be dismissed as the confused ramblings of an elderly woman. Rebecca was smarter than I had given her credit for. I walked to my wall safe and entered the combination, keeping the recorder running. From inside, I pulled out a thick manila folder. "Rebecca, are you familiar with Hartwell investigations?" Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, should I be?" I opened the folder and spread several photographs across my desk. These were taken over the past 6 weeks. Here you are at Brigham and Women's Hospital, speaking with Dr. Patricia Morse in the toxicology department. Here you are at the public library, checking out books on plant poisons and untraceable toxins. And here you are at Cambridge Natural Foods, purchasing oleander extract. Rebecca sank into the leather chair across from my desk, her perfectly composed facade finally cracking. How long have you known? I have suspected for 2 months. I've had proof for 3 weeks. But I wanted to see how far you would go. The truth was more complicated. My suspicions had begun when Rebecca started asking detailed questions about my will, about trust structures, about what would happen to the business if something happened to me. Casual questions over family dinners, but too frequent and too specific to be mere curiosity. Then there were the small changes in her behavior. The way she watched me eat at restaurants, as if waiting for something. The sudden interest in my daily routine, my morning walks, my evening habits. The frequent suggestions that I might want to consider hiring a live-in companion for safety. But it was David who really worried me. My son had become distant over the past year, avoiding direct eye contact during conversations, changing the subject whenever I mentioned future business plans. When I announced my intention to step back from day-to-day operations, his relief had been too obvious, too immediate. So, I had hired Hartwell Investigations, the same firm I used for background checks on potential business partners. Within a week, they had uncovered the truth about David and Rebecca's financial situation. The picture that emerged was far darker than I had imagined. David's architectural firm was hemorrhaging money. 3 major projects had gone over budget due to his poor planning and cost overruns. The firm owed nearly $2 million to contractors and suppliers. Without immediate capital infusion, bankruptcy was inevitable. Rebecca's interior design business was equally troubled. She had invested heavily in high-end inventory that was not selling, leaving her with enormous credit card debts and unpaid loans. Together, they were drowning in obligations that totaled over $3 million. But the most damning discovery was the life insurance policy Rebecca had taken out on me 8 months ago. $2 million, with her listed as the primary beneficiary. She had forged my signature on the application and listed herself as my primary caregiver to establish insurable interest. Rebecca was studying my face, probably calculating how much I knew and how much I could prove. Eleanor, whatever you think is happening here, you are wrong. David and I love you. We would never hurt you. Love. The word felt hollow in the elegant study where Thomas and I had spent so many quiet evenings planning our future together. This room had witnessed genuine love, the kind built on respect and shared dreams. What Rebecca offered was not love. It was greed wearing the mask of family affection. Picked up my desk phone and dialed. Detective Morrison. This is Eleanor Wilson. I need to report an attempted poisoning at my residence. Yes, I will hold. Rebecca jumped up from her chair. Eleanor, what are you doing? You cannot call the police. There is no crime here. You have not been poisoned. You are fine. That is true. I have not been poisoned. Because I did not drink the wine you doctored. But you still attempted to poison me, which is a felony regardless of whether you succeeded. She began pacing behind the chair, her composure completely shattered. This is ridiculous. No one will believe you. An old woman with a recorder and some photographs, making wild accusations against her loving family. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps a jury would believe that a devoted daughter-in-law was simply the victim of an elderly woman's paranoid delusions. I opened another folder from the safe. But what would they think about these? The second folder contained bank records, credit reports, and financial statements that painted a devastating picture of David and Rebecca's desperation. It also contained copies of emails between them, obtained through a private investigator's careful monitoring of their digital communications. The emails were damning. Discussions of my daily routine, my medication schedule, my evening habits. Speculation about how long it would take for my death to be discovered. Most chilling of all were Rebecca's messages about researching undetectable poisons and her contacts with Dr. Morse about symptoms of various toxins. Rebecca stopped pacing and stared at the documents. You had us investigated. You spied on your own family. I protected myself from people who were planning to murder me. There is a difference. Detective Morrison's voice came through the phone speaker. Mrs. Wilson, I'm here. Please describe the situation. I gave a concise account of the evening's events, reading directly from my notes about Rebecca's behavior, the timeline of the suspected poisoning attempt, and the evidence I had collected. Detective Morrison asked several clarifying questions and confirmed she would dispatch officers immediately. After hanging up, I looked at Rebecca, who had collapsed back into the chair with her head in her hands. Where is David tonight? The office. He is working late on the Henderson project drawings. Does he know about tonight's plan? Rebecca's silence was answer enough. The police arrived within 15 minutes. 2 detectives and 2 uniformed officers who listened carefully as I explained the situation and presented my evidence. They bagged the wine glass and the empty vial for testing, photographed the scene, and took detailed statements from both Rebecca and me. Rebecca maintained her innocence throughout the questioning, insisting that she had no knowledge of how the vial came to be in her purse and that she had added nothing to my wine. Her performance was convincing, full of hurt and confusion at being accused of such a terrible crime. But her story fell apart when Detective Morrison called David. He arrived at my house 30 minutes later, his face gray with panic. The officers questioned him separately, and within an hour, the truth began to emerge. David had not known about Rebecca's specific plan for tonight, but he was fully aware of her research into poisons. They had discussed various scenarios for my death, always in hypothetical terms, always framed as preparations for the inevitable. David claimed he thought they were simply planning for my natural passing, not hastening it. But the emails told a different story. David had provided detailed information about my routines, my medical history, my evening habits. He had suggested that my death might be less suspicious if it appeared to be natural causes, perhaps a heart attack brought on by the stress of business changes. Most damaging of all was a message David had sent just 3 days earlier. Remember, it needs to happen before she changes the will. Once she sets up those trusts, we lose control of everything. As dawn broke over Boston Harbor, Rebecca was arrested for attempted murder and insurance fraud. David was charged as an accessory and co-conspirator. Both were released on bail, pending trial, but the damage to our family was irreversible. I spent the following weeks in a strange state of emotional numbness. The immediate danger was past, but the betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. These were people I had loved, trusted, welcomed into my home and my heart. David was my only child, the son Thomas and I had raised with such hope and pride. The media attention was intense but brief. Wealthy elderly woman narrowly escapes poisoning by greedy relatives. The story had all the elements that sold newspapers and drove website traffic. I declined all interview requests and had my attorney handle press inquiries. 3 weeks after the arrests, I received an unexpected visitor. David's daughter Lily, my 16-year-old granddaughter, stood on my doorstep with tears streaming down her face. Grandmother Eleanor, I am so sorry. I had no idea what they were planning. Please do not think I knew about any of this. I brought Lily into my study and made tea, the same ritual I had shared with her since she was small. She was Thomas's granddaughter too, and I could see so much of him in her gentle nature and genuine distress over her parents' actions. Lily, none of this is your fault. You are not responsible for your parents' choices. But I should have seen something. Should have known they were in trouble. I studied her young face, so full of pain and confusion. Lily had been kept carefully isolated from her parents' financial problems and criminal planning. At 16, she was old enough to understand the gravity of what had happened, but young enough to still believe that families did not hurt each other. What will happen to me now? She asked. With both parents facing prison time, she was looking at an uncertain future. You will come live with me if you want to. I had made this decision the moment I saw her at my door. Your parents' mistakes do not change my love for you. Relief flooded her face. I was so afraid you would hate our whole family now. Never. You are not them, Lily. You get to choose who you become. Over the following months, as the legal proceedings unfolded, Lily moved into my home. Having her there brought unexpected joy during one of the darkest periods of my life. She reminded me that not all family relationships are poisoned by greed and manipulation. The trial began in early spring. The prosecution had a strong case built on the physical evidence, the financial records, and the electronic communications between David and Rebecca. Their defense attorneys tried to portray them as victims of financial desperation who had made poor choices but never intended actual harm. Rebecca's lawyer argued that she had never intended to kill me, only to make me sick enough to agree to live in care that would give them access to my finances. David's attorney painted him as a naive husband manipulated by his scheming wife. Neither strategy worked. The evidence was overwhelming. The oleander extract found in the vial and wine glass was highly concentrated and potentially lethal. Dr. Morse testified that Rebecca had specifically asked about dosages that would cause death while mimicking natural causes. The email communications showed months of planning and preparation. Most damaging was Rebecca's own testimony. Under cross-examination, she became defensive and angry, revealing the entitled attitude that had driven her to attempt murder. She claimed that I had more money than any one person deserved, that David and she had sacrificed years caring for me, that they had earned the right to my wealth. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Rebecca was convicted of attempted murder in the first degree and sentenced to 25 years in prison. David was found guilty of conspiracy and received 12 years. Both convictions carried the possibility of parole, but not for at least 10 years. I felt no satisfaction watching them led away in handcuffs. These were people I had loved, and their imprisonment represented the complete destruction of relationships I had treasured. But I also felt a profound sense of relief. The threat was over. I was safe. In the aftermath of the trial, I made significant changes to my life and business structure. Wilson Properties was reorganized as a family trust with Lily as the primary beneficiary. She would inherit control of the business when she turned 30, with professional management overseeing operations until then. My personal estate was restructured to prevent future manipulation. The vast majority of my wealth would go to charitable causes, with provisions for Lily's education, housing, and reasonable living expenses. No one would ever again have a financial incentive to harm me. I also hired a full-time security consultant and installed comprehensive monitoring systems throughout my home. The measures seemed excessive, but recent events had taught me that family relationships offer no protection against human greed. Lily thrived in her new environment. Away from her parents' toxic influence, she blossomed into a confident, principled young woman. She excelled in school, developed close friendships, and began volunteering with elderly residents at a nearby assisted living facility. One evening, as we sat in my study reviewing her college applications, she asked the question I had been dreading. "Grandmother Eleanor, do you think Mom and Dad really would have killed you?" I set down the application I was reading and looked at this remarkable young woman who had brought such light back into my life. "I think your mother was prepared to kill me, yes. Your father convinced himself he was planning for my natural death, but he knew Rebecca's timeline did not align with nature's schedule." She was quiet for a long moment. "Makes me sick to think about. How do people become so consumed by money that they lose their humanity?" It was a profound question from a 16-year-old. I think they convinced themselves that they deserved my money more than I did. Once you believe you are entitled to something, it becomes easier to justify taking it by any means necessary. Will you ever forgive them? Another difficult question. Forgiveness is complicated, Lily. I do not hate your parents, but I cannot trust them. I hope someday they will understand the magnitude of what they did and feel genuine remorse. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting or exposing myself to future harm. As Lily's 18th birthday approached, I began having conversations with her about our family's future. She would soon be an adult, able to make her own choices about relationships with her parents and her role in the business. "I want to work in the company," she told me one day as we walked through the public garden. "But I want to earn my position, not just inherit it. Can you help me understand the business from the ground up?" I was proud of her attitude and her work ethic. Over the following months, she spent time in every department of Wilson Properties, learning about property management, development, financing, and construction. She showed natural aptitude for the work and genuine interest in creating quality housing for families. 2 years into her parents' sentences, Rebecca requested a meeting with me through her attorney. She claimed to have found religion in prison and wanted to apologize for her actions. Her lawyer suggested that a show of remorse might help with her eventual parole application. I declined the meeting. David also reached out, sending letters that alternated between self-pity and genuine-sounding apology. His messages painted him as the victim of Rebecca's manipulation, a loving son who had lost his way due to financial stress and his wife's influence. I read his letters but did not respond. David had made his choices with full knowledge of the consequences. His attempts to shift blame to Rebecca might fool a parole board, but they did not fool me. The 5th anniversary of their arrests arrived without fanfare. Lily, now 21 and a junior at Harvard Business School, had grown into an extraordinary young woman. She managed several small properties for Wilson Properties while maintaining excellent grades and an active social life. On that anniversary evening, we sat in my study discussing plans for a new affordable housing development. It was the same room where Rebecca had tried to poison me, but time and Lily's presence had transformed it from a place of betrayal into a center of renewed purpose. Grandmother Eleanor, can I ask you something personal? Course. Do you ever feel lonely? I mean, after everything that happened with Mom and Dad, do you trust anyone anymore? I considered her question carefully. I trust you completely and without reservation. I trust my attorney, my business partners, and several close friends. But you are right that the experience changed me. I am more careful now about people's motivations. She nodded thoughtfully. Understand. But I hope you do not let their betrayal prevent you from having meaningful relationships. Her words stayed with me over the following weeks. At 78, I had perhaps 10 or 15 good years left. Did I want to spend them isolated by suspicion and fear? The answer came to me gradually. I began accepting social invitations I had previously declined. I joined a book club at the local library. I started attending concerts and theater performances with friends. Slowly, carefully, I began to rebuild connections with people who had known me before the trial and scandal. One afternoon, while reviewing quarterly financial reports, I received an unexpected phone call. Detective Morrison, who had investigated the poisoning attempt, was retiring from the police force. Mrs. Wilson, I wanted to thank you personally for your cooperation during the investigation. Your thoroughness and preparation made our job much easier. I'm glad I could help, Detective. I hope you enjoy your retirement. Actually, that is why I am calling. I am starting a consulting business for people who suspect they are being financially exploited by family members. Elder abuse is more common than most people realize, and victims often do not know how to protect themselves. Actually, that is why I am calling. I am starting a consulting business for people who suspect they are being financially exploited by family members. Elder abuse is more common than most people realize, and victims often do not know how to protect themselves. It was an intriguing proposition. Would you be interested in having me speak to some potential clients? Share my experience. I would be honored. Over the following year, I began speaking at workshops and seminars about financial protection for elderly individuals. My story resonated with audiences who had experienced similar situations or feared they might face such betrayal in the future. The work was emotionally challenging but deeply rewarding. I met dozens of people who had been victimized by relatives, caregivers, or financial advisors. Many had suffered in silence, too ashamed or frightened to seek help. One woman, Martha, approached me after a presentation in Newton. Her son had systematically emptied her bank accounts over a 2-year period, leaving her nearly destitute. She had discovered the theft but was afraid to report him because he was her only living relative. Martha, you cannot protect someone from the consequences of their choices. But you can protect yourself from further harm. I helped connect her with legal services and financial planners who specialized in elder protection. Within 6 months, She had recovered most of her stolen assets and secured her remaining wealth against future theft. Stories like Martha's reminded me that my experience, however painful, had equipped me to help others avoid similar betrayal. The poisoning attempt that nearly ended my life had ultimately given it new purpose. Lily graduated from Harvard with honors and joined Wilson Properties full-time. Her first major project was developing a secure housing complex specifically designed for elderly residents who had been financially abused by family members. The development included on-site legal services, financial counseling, and security measures to prevent future exploitation. As we broke ground on the project, I reflected on how profoundly my life had changed since that evening when I found Rebecca with the poison vial. The betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but it had also revealed strengths I did not know I possessed. At 81, I am no longer the same woman who built Wilson Properties through grief and determination. I am someone who survived her family's attempt to murder her and chose to transform that survival into service for others. Rebecca will be eligible for parole in 5 more years. David could be released in 7. I do not know if they have learned anything from their imprisonment or if they still see themselves as victims of circumstance rather than perpetrators of a terrible crime. What I do know is that their freedom will not threaten me again. I am protected by law, by security systems, by careful financial planning, and by the watchful care of people who genuinely love me. Most importantly, I am protected by the knowledge that I am stronger than I ever imagined. The woman who discovered that empty poison vial was afraid and vulnerable. The woman I have become would handle such a threat with swift, decisive action. Lily often asks if I regret the path that brought us together. The question is complicated. I regret the pain and betrayal. I regret the loss of relationships I thought were genuine. I regret that David and Rebecca chose greed over love. But I do not regret surviving. I do not regret the life I have built in the aftermath of their betrayal. And I certainly do not regret the privilege of raising this extraordinary young woman, who represents the best possibilities of our family's future. The poison Rebecca intended for me would have killed more than my body. It would have destroyed Wilson Properties, ended my charitable work, and robbed Lily of the grandmother who could guide her toward a meaningful life. Instead, their failed murder attempt revealed truths that set me free. Free from illusions about family loyalty that was actually manipulation. Free from financial vulnerability to people who saw my wealth as their inheritance. Free to choose how to spend my remaining years. I choose to spend them building something better than what was nearly taken from me. The company will survive and thrive under Lily's leadership. The affordable housing projects will provide secure homes for families who need them. The elder protection work will help other potential victims recognize and escape financial abuse. These are not the achievements I expected when I started rebuilding my life after Thomas died. But they are the legacy I choose to leave. Shaped by betrayal but not defined by it. In my study each evening, I still use the same desk where I confronted Rebecca with evidence of her attempted murder. But now it is covered with architectural plans for housing developments, legal documents protecting vulnerable elderly clients, and college brochures as Lily considers graduate school options. The room that once witnessed my near-death has become the center of my renewed life. Every morning, I sit at that desk and plan new projects, new ways to use my resources and experience to build something meaningful. This is what survival looks like at 81. Not just staying alive but choosing to make that survival matter. The poison meant to end my story instead began its most important chapter. And every day I wake up healthy and purposeful is a victory over people who thought my life was worth less than their greed. But my story does not end with philosophical reflections on survival and revenge. The practical realities of rebuilding a life after such profound betrayal required daily choices, small victories, and the gradual reconstruction of faith in human nature. 6 months after the trial concluded, I received a call from the Massachusetts Department of Elder Affairs. They had been following my case and wanted to offer me a position on their advisory board for financial abuse prevention. The role would involve reviewing policy recommendations, consulting on difficult cases, and helping to train social workers who investigated elder abuse complaints. I accepted immediately. The work gave structure to my newfound mission while connecting me with professionals who shared my commitment to protecting vulnerable elderly citizens. Through the advisory board, I learned about the staggering scope of elder financial abuse in our state alone. The statistics were sobering. Nearly 1 in 10 older Americans experienced some form of financial abuse each year, with family members responsible for over 60% of reported cases. The average victim lost more than $100,000, and many never recovered financially or emotionally from the betrayal. My case had been unusual in its premeditation and violence, but the underlying dynamic was depressingly common. Adult children facing financial pressure viewed their elderly parents as sources of emergency funding rather than people deserving respect and protection. Dr. Sarah Kim, the department's chief psychologist, became both a colleague and a friend during my first year on the advisory board. She helped me understand the psychological profiles of financial abusers and their victims, knowledge that proved invaluable in my consulting work with Detective Morrison. "Eleanor," she told me during one of our monthly lunches, "your case demonstrates something important about prevention. The victims who survive and recover are almost always those who maintain some level of suspicion about unusual behavior. Trust is beautiful, but blind trust can be fatal." Her words reminded me of conversations I had with Lily about relationships and money. At 22, she was beginning serious romantic relationships and needed to understand how financial dynamics could corrupt even loving partnerships. We had established a family tradition of monthly financial meetings where I taught her about investment strategies, business management, and wealth preservation. But increasingly, our conversations focused on the psychology of money and the importance of maintaining financial independence even within committed relationships. "Grandmother Eleanor," Lily asked during one such meeting, "how do you know when someone loves you for yourself versus loving you for your money?" It was the question I had wrestled with since Thomas died and left me wealthy beyond my childhood dreams. "Watch their behavior when money is not involved," I told her. "Do they spend time with you when there is nothing to gain? Do they show interest in your thoughts and experiences, or only in your financial decisions?" She nodded thoughtfully. "What about family members? How do you maintain relationships when you know people might have ulterior motives?" "That is harder," I admitted. "With family, you want to believe that blood relationships provide some protection against greed. But as we learned with your parents, genetics do not guarantee character." The conversation reminded me of a decision I had been postponing. David's first parole hearing was scheduled for the following year, 8 years into his 12-year sentence. His attorney had contacted me several times, hoping I would provide a character reference or agree to a victim impact statement supporting early release. I had avoided responding to these requests, uncertain about my feelings toward the son who had conspired in my attempted murder. Part of me wanted to maintain the anger that had sustained me through the investigation and trial. But another part wondered if 8 years in prison had changed him, made him genuinely remorseful for his actions. Detective Morrison, now running her consulting practice full-time, offered to help me prepare for the parole hearing regardless of what position I chose to take. "Eleanor," she said during one of our client meetings, "the most important thing is that you feel safe with whatever decision you make. If his release would cause you anxiety or fear, that is reason enough to oppose it." But the issue was more complex than simple safety concerns. David's continued imprisonment would not undo the betrayal or restore our relationship. At the same time, his freedom might represent a threat to other potential victims if he had not genuinely reformed. I decided to visit him in prison, something I had not done since his sentencing 8 years earlier. The meeting required advance arrangements through his attorney and prison officials, but I needed to look into my son's eyes and assess his genuine state of mind. The visit took place on a cold February morning at the medium security facility where David was serving his sentence. He looked older than his 43 years, his hair prematurely gray and his face bearing the drawn expression of long-term incarceration. "Mom," he said when the guard brought him to the visiting room, "I cannot believe you came." We sat across from each other at a small metal table, separated by an invisible chasm of betrayal and lost trust. David had lost weight during his imprisonment, and his hands showed the calluses of whatever work he performed in the prison workshops. "I wanted to see you before your parole hearing," I said. to understand if you have learned anything from these 8 years." He was quiet for a long moment, studying the table surface between us. "I have had a lot of time to think about what we did to you, what I did to you, and what conclusions have you reached?" David met my eyes for the first time since I had arrived. I convinced myself that we were planning for something inevitable, that we were not really planning to hurt you, just to be prepared when nature took its course. But nature was not taking its course fast enough for Rebecca's timeline. No, it was not. He ran his hands through his graying hair, a gesture that reminded me painfully of the boy he had once been. "Mom, I know this sounds inadequate, but I am sorry. Not just sorry we got caught, but sorry for betraying your trust and putting you in danger. What about Rebecca? Do you still blame her for leading you into this situation?" I spent the first 3 years here blaming Rebecca for everything. It was easier than accepting responsibility for my own choices. But the truth is, I knew what we were planning was wrong. I knew it could hurt you. I chose to participate anyway because I wanted the money more than I valued your life. His honesty was startling after years of self-serving excuses and attempts to minimize his role. "If you are released on parole, what would you do with your freedom?" "I have been taking college courses through the prison education program. Accounting and business management. I want to work for a non-profit organization, something where I can contribute to society instead of just taking from it." "Why should I believe that you have genuinely changed?" David was quiet for several minutes, considering his response. "'Cause I have seen what greed does to people, Mom. Not just to victims like you, but to perpetrators like me. I destroyed my relationship with the person I loved most in the world for money I never even got to spend. That is not rational behavior. It is the behavior of someone whose values were completely corrupted." We talked for another hour about his experiences in prison, his relationship with Lily, and his understanding of the pain he had caused. When the visit ended, I still was not certain about supporting his parole application, but I was convinced that his remorse was genuine. The parole hearing took place 3 months later in a sterile conference room at the state parole board offices. David appeared before a panel of 3 board members, flanked by his attorney and a prison counselor who testified about his behavior during incarceration. I had decided to attend as an observer rather than providing either support or opposition for his release. My presence in the room was statement enough about my continued interest in the case. David's attorney presented evidence of his model behavior in prison, his participation in educational programs, and his plans for post-release employment with a Boston-area homeless services organization. The prison counselor described David as a thoughtful inmate who had shown genuine remorse and worked to help other prisoners prepare for reintegration into society. When given the opportunity to speak, David addressed his remarks directly to the parole board but also to me. 8 years ago, I participated in a plan to murder my mother for her money. I have spent every day since then trying to understand how I became someone capable of such betrayal. I cannot undo what I did, but I can choose how to live with the knowledge of what I did." He paused, gathering himself before continuing. "If you grant me parole, I will spend the rest of my life trying to prevent other families from experiencing what ours went through. I will work with organizations that help elderly people protect themselves from financial abuse. I will share my story with anyone who might benefit from understanding how ordinary people can lose their moral compass when money is involved." The parole board retired to deliberate for 30 minutes before announcing their decision. David would be released on parole after serving 9 years of his 12-year sentence, with strict conditions including regular meetings with a parole officer, participation in counseling programs, and community service requirements. As we left the hearing room, David approached me hesitantly. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but would you be willing to meet with me occasionally after I am released? I do not expect us to have a normal relationship, but I would like the chance to show you who I have become." I considered his request carefully. "We can have coffee once a month," I said finally. "Public places, brief meetings. If you demonstrate that you have genuinely changed, we might be able to build something resembling a relationship over time." His relief was visible. "Thank you. I will not disappoint you again." Time would tell if that promise had substance behind it. David was released 6 weeks later to a halfway house in Cambridge, where he would live for the first year of his parole. His first job was with the Pine Street Inn, Boston's largest homeless services organization, where he worked in their financial counseling program, helping homeless individuals manage benefits and plan for housing stability. Our first coffee meeting took place at a cafe near Harvard Square, neutral territory where we could speak privately without the emotional weight of more familiar locations. David looked healthier than he had in prison, having regained some weight and lost the pallor of institutional living. He told me about his work at Pine Street Inn, helping people who had lost everything rebuild their financial lives. Many of his clients were elderly individuals who had been evicted after family members stole their rent money or Social Security benefits. "It is humbling work," he said. "These people have so little, but family members still find ways to exploit them. It makes me think about how much damage Rebecca and I could have done if we had succeeded." I studied his face as he spoke, looking for signs of manipulation or self-serving motivation. What I saw was genuine engagement with his work and authentic shame about his past actions. Over the following months, our coffee meetings became a regular routine. David was consistent in his attendance, his sobriety, and his commitment to his work. He never asked for money, never hinted at wanting to restore our previous relationship, never pushed for more contact than I was comfortable providing. Slowly, carefully, I began to believe that his transformation might be real. Lily, who had been deeply skeptical about any reconciliation with her father, eventually agreed to meet with him as well. Their relationship would require even more careful rebuilding, given the additional layer of abandonment she had experienced when both parents were imprisoned during her formative teenage years. But at 23, Lily was mature enough to recognize that people could change and wise enough to proceed cautiously in rebuilding trust with her father. Rebecca, meanwhile, was serving her full 25-year sentence with no possibility of early release. Her appeals had been unsuccessful, and according to David, she remained bitter and unrepentant about her conviction. She blamed me for her imprisonment, claiming that I had orchestrated her downfall out of spite rather than self-defense. I felt no satisfaction in Rebecca's continued incarceration, but I also felt no sympathy. She had chosen to attempt murder rather than face the consequences of her financial irresponsibility. The length of her sentence reflected the severity of that choice. As my 85th birthday approached, I found myself reflecting on the decade that had passed since the poisoning attempt. Those 10 years had brought profound changes to my life, my relationships, and my sense of purpose. Wilson Properties had thrived under professional management, with Lily taking on increasing responsibility as she gained experience and education. The company's affordable housing developments had provided homes for over 1,500 families, including dozens of elderly individuals who had been displaced by financial abuse. My work with the Elder Protection Advisory Board had influenced policy changes that made it harder for family members to exploit elderly relatives. New regulations required additional oversight for power of attorney arrangements, and created mandatory reporting requirements for financial institutions that suspected elder abuse. Detective Morrison's consulting practice had grown into a statewide resource for elder abuse prevention, and we had collaborated on dozens of cases similar to my own. Not all had ended as successfully, but our combined expertise had helped many potential victims escape exploitation before suffering serious harm. Most importantly, my relationship with Lily had deepened into a partnership based on mutual respect and shared values. She had grown into a remarkable woman whose integrity and competence assured me that Wilson Properties would continue to serve families long after I was gone. Even my tentative reconciliation with David had progressed beyond my initial expectations. After 3 years of monthly coffee meetings, we had graduated to occasional dinners and family gatherings that included Lily. David had proven his commitment to redemption through consistent actions over time. He had remarried a woman named Maria who worked as a social worker specializing in elder care. Their relationship seemed healthy and grounded in shared values rather than financial convenience. Maria understood David's history and supported his ongoing efforts to make amends for his past actions. On my 85th birthday, Lily organized a small celebration at my home, inviting the friends and colleagues who had become my chosen family over the past decade. David and Maria attended, along with Detective Morrison, Dr. Kim from the Elder Affairs Department, and several neighbors who had become close friends. As I looked around my study, the same room where I had confronted Rebecca with evidence of her attempted murder, I marveled at how completely the space had been transformed by time and new relationships. The walls that had once witnessed betrayal and fear now hosted laughter and genuine affection. The poison that was meant to end my life had instead become the catalyst for its most meaningful chapter. I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed, formed friendships based on shared purpose rather than convenience, and created a legacy that would protect other families from the devastation I had experienced. At 85, I was healthier, happier, and more fulfilled than I had been at 73. The decade following the poisoning attempt had been the richest and most productive of my entire life. That night, after my guests had gone home and Lily had returned to her apartment, I sat alone in my study with a cup of tea and thought about the future. I had perhaps 5 or 10 good years remaining, and I intended to use them well. There were more housing developments to plan, more abuse cases to consult on, more policies to influence. Lily would soon be ready to take full control of Wilson Properties, freeing me to focus entirely on advocacy work. And someday, when I was truly ready, I might even write a book about my experience. Not for fame or money, but to help other potential victims recognize the warning signs of family financial abuse before it was too late. The story would end where it began, in this study where I had faced down death and chosen to fight for my life. But it would also look forward to the countless elderly individuals who might be spared similar betrayal because one stubborn old woman refused to become a victim. The empty poison vial that had nearly ended my story would become a symbol of survival, transformation, and the unexpected gifts that can emerge from our darkest moments. That may be the most satisfying revenge of all, turning attempted murder into a force for protecting others and building something better than what was nearly destroyed.